Joining me now is child and adolescent psychologist and Sky News contributor Clare Rowe. Clare, good to see you. Thank you for joining me. Let's start with homeschooling, because research has found that it's more than doubled in Australia over the last 5 years. I thought this was interesting, Clare, because, homeschooling was all most kids ever knew during the COVID years. But why do you think that this trend is still on the rise?
Yeah, thanks, Danica. I think it's huge. I've never before in my career have I seen so many parents pulling their kids out of mainstream schooling. And I just don't think it's a passing trend. There's a few reasons. I think first and foremost, I think it's a reflection of the deep dissatisfaction with our current education system. And I'm just seeing parents who usually would be very happy with public schooling. They went to public schooling themselves. They otherwise want their kids to go to public schools. But between declining academic standards, principally the lack of discipline, the classrooms I'm hearing about are in absolute chaos. And then, of course, this encroachment of ideological agendas into classroom. I'm seeing parents who are kind of faced with this decision of like loans and remortgaging their house and taking up more jobs to get their kids into the private system, or they're saying, Claire, we've got to homeschool them because we want them to catch up academically. We, of course, also have this massive uptake with child anxiety. And I just don't think that schools are handling that well. There is a huge amount of particularly teenage girls who are refusing to go to school. And after months and months of missing out, their parents basically, they don't want to homeschool, but it's a last-ditch kind of option to them. And I think homeschooling may work for some, but it should not be the only viable option left for parents who simply want their kids to get a better education. These are parents who are quitting their own jobs, turning their lives on end, going into financial debt and ruin to try and help their kids. And I think the responsibility just falls back on this failing public education system at the moment.
I absolutely agree, and it's such a shame as well that it's come to this. Now, across Australia, young kids are going to school riddled with anxiety and fear over what insidious bullying could await them after they enter the school gates. According to News Corp's Great Australian Parents Survey, almost half of Aussie kids have been bullied at school, 16% have been bullied online, and at least 7% say it actually has led their child to have suicidal thoughts. Claire, there are calls now for a national standard to be developed to try and curb this. As a child psychologist yourself, what do you think should be included?
Well, I mean, it's not about what's included, because I think we have spoken and spoken and spoken about anti-bullying. There are millions poured into the education system when it comes to programs and initiatives and teaching kids about respectful relationships. And for decades now, in an educational manner, and policies and procedures, we have spoken about anti-bullying. For me, it's about when are we going to actually implement things? And it's much like, you talk about current laws these days and whether they're actually implemented. And the same thing goes for these policies of anti-bullying. So, look, the number one thing I would suggest that has to be included is we have to return to some type of policy where there is not just a zero tolerance for bullying, because we talk about that a lot, but immediate and meaningful consequences to the perpetrators of bullying. Now, I'm one who always says we don't want to label every child negative interaction as bullying, because kids pick on each other, they fight. But when it is targeted, relentless harassment and intimidation targeted towards one student, and then we get what they call this restorative justice approach, which essentially means you sit the bully down with the victim time and time again, and we have a nice chat and we try to, be friends again. When are we going to actually just implement consequences to that bully for their actions? So that's got to be the first one. And there's got to be accountability put back on schools. Parents should have a clear pathway to escalate these concerns when bullying is not addressed properly. And I have been contacted in recent weeks by lawyers of parents who are now seeking legal advice on whether it would be appropriate to sue schools for their lack of action on the bullying towards their child. And of course, the poor mental health and outcomes for their children that they've been left with. So, it's just about less talk and more action.
Absolutely. Look, something has to be done. I mean, clearly it's out of control now when you're getting like possible lawyers involved. It's ridiculous it's come to this. Now, we're almost out of time,
We don't want to go
Claire.
that way, right? We don't want to go that way of like the US, where everyone
No.
sues everyone all the time. And that's what I feel. But parents, they don't feel like they've got any other options.
No, it's really sad. Look, Claire, we're almost out of time, but just very quickly, academics and students who attack Zionism can be sanctioned for anti-Semitism under a common definition approved by Australian universities, 30 of them actually, to protect Jewish Australians. Claire, how did it come to this where unis actually have to agree on student safety?
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, they're agreeing that people shouldn't be harassed, intimidated, made to feel unwelcome because of their cultural race. And now we need a whole drawn up policy and we can't agree on the definitions and so forth. I mean, it is long overdue, but I'll just go back to the previous point and say, okay, we'll put the policy in place. The policy has to educate staff on university campuses of what do you do when you see this anti-Semitism? Is there a safe pathway for reporting it? They need to educate students on what the consequences will be, and then they need to follow through on those consequences. So it's all good having a policy written up, but unless there's action, people will just keep doing what they've always done.
I mean, it's just astounding that it's come to an agreement that universities have to have. Unbelievable. Clare Rowe, good to catch up. Thank you very much for joining me.